Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Seeds and Weeds podcast brought to you by Small House Farm. Are you a gardener, an herbalist, a forager? Maybe you're just a little plant curious. You've come to the right place. This is Seeds and Weeds. Howdy, friends. Welcome back to the show. Today, we are going to be sharing some tips for direct sowing garden success. We're going to be covering all sorts of different things, some of our favorite cool season and warm weather crops. We're going to dig into the benefits of direct sowing as well as the challenges. We got lots of different techniques and tips and tricks that we're going to share with you to help you direct sow the garden of your dreams. But before we dig into all that, Heather, what is new here at Small House Farm?
Well, kayak season has officially started for us, and we've got on the river a couple times already. Even though it's been pretty cool, we have bundled up, wore pants and sweaters, and got out there on the river. So that's felt really good.
Yes. So for longtime listeners, you know that we kayak a lot. And last year we did a big kayak challenge. So we are already back at it early this year. And like Heather mentioned, it's been pretty chilly. So yeah, we've been like sweaters, jackets, winter hats out on the river, but it has been absolutely awesome.
Definitely. And we've been watching the garden kind of come to life. And obviously nature just is bursting alive at this time of year. So we've been noticing our native plant beds coming up. We got a lot of different native plants that like to come up first, you know, Bernardas and Echinacea and New England aster. Those things are just kind of pushing through. And it's fun to watch the bare gardens
spring to life.
Yes, one would say. Especially because we haven't been able to plant as many things out in the gardens as we would hope because everything's just been so cold. Yes,
it has been a challenge for sure this year. We have got so many plants ready to go out into the garden, and it is just not time yet. We got tomato plants right now, the biggest tomato plants we've ever had indoors, in the biggest pots that we've ever had tomatoes in indoors because we have to keep potting them up to keep them happy.
We've really tried hard to keep up on our transplanting. So as soon as those plants are too big for their containers, to put them in the next size container. And we've actually done better this year than ever before, which is exactly why we have 3-foot tomato plants that we are hauling, 50 plants back and forth out of the house because we can't get them in the ground yet. It's okay. It will happen. And we know it's happening soon.
I think this is really a great example of why it may be nice to do more direct sowing, which is the subject of today's show. So I'm excited to be talking more about that topic with everybody today.
But let's first start, before we dive into that, let's start with some Patreon shout outs. These are the people that have joined the Patreon community in the past month since our last episode.
Yep. So we have got Sue, the Rockin' Deb Cochran, Denise Koroslev, Tiffany Butler, Julia, Courtney McGow, Elvinus, and Diane Perkins. Thank you all so much for being a part of our Patreon community. We're so thankful to have you here with us, and to all of our members of our Patreon who some have been there for years now at this point. Thank you all. Your support really makes it possible for us to do so many of the things that we do at Small House Farm, including, of course, the podcast. So if you're listening right now and you enjoyed the podcast and you want to show your support, of course, tuning in, leaving a review, that's a great way to do it. And if you want to show your support even beyond that, consider joining our community on Patreon. You can find a link to that and so much more down in the show notes, and of course on our website, which is seedsandweedspodcast.com.
So first, tell me, what does direct sowing really mean?
Well, I mean, just like the name implies, and sometimes you'll also hear it referred to as direct seeding, which I think is even more self-explanatory, right? This is just planting seeds directly into the garden, right where those plants are going to live their whole life, as opposed to starting them indoors and bringing in transplants. Nope, we are direct sowing those seeds right into their home.
Yeah, and it's such an easier task for beginner gardeners, because when I think about being a gardener, I think about just taking that seed and putting it in the ground and watching it grow. And that's what this... It's
just that easy.
Yeah, it's just that easy. So that's what this is.
Right. So that means that we don't need lights and seed starting trays and heat mats and shelving and all of the accoutrement that comes with starting seeds indoors. We get to skip all that. Like you said, just like we imagine gardening to be, just tossing a seed on the ground and boom, harvest.
Yeah, no weeds, no pests, just beautiful, gorgeous, luscious plants.
Yes. Unfortunately, that's not really true. And we're going to unpack that more because there's certainly some challenges challenges that come along with direct sowing, but it does have its benefits. One of them being less equipment. I think that it sometimes feels like a faster process because we're not doing all of that work in advance. If we imagine like a crop like peppers that we're going to start, 6 to 8 weeks before our frost date. I mean, we're putting 2 months of work into these peppers, or like the tomatoes that we're hauling back and forth right now because of the cool weather. So much work and time goes into it before it even hits the garden. So we're skipping all of that again with the direct sow. And many of our crops, and we got some examples coming up that are direct sown, do have a shorter life cycle. From seed to harvest is a shorter process. So we really get to experience that satisfaction of getting something to eat or a beautiful flower to enjoy or whatever it might be a little bit faster than we would if we have to start those seeds indoors.
But starting seeds indoors comes with the ability to control every single aspect of that seed's life, at least beginning of its life. And that's the challenge to direct sowing, is that you are at the whim of nature, which nature can be quite unpredictable.
That's a polite way to put it. Absolutely. You never know what Mother Nature is going to do. And when we're starting our seeds indoors, we can control the moisture. We can control the temperature, how much light they're going to get. And we don't have control over any of that outside, right? Mother Nature is going to do what Mother Nature wants. So that's certainly going to be one of the challenges that we experience, is timing when these seeds go into the garden, making sure we're timing it properly. And then sometimes it doesn't matter how our timing is. Mother Nature still is going to throw us a curveball. And right along with that, we're going to see more weed competition, which of course our seeds indoors are not going to experience this at all because it's a controlled environment. Out in the garden, that's not always the case. Good example here, carrots. Now, carrots are pretty slow to germinate. We're going to direct sow them, but they're going to take some time. So slow to germinate, in fact, that quite often weeds will start to take over that space before the carrots even get going. So that is definitely something that we have to pay attention to and be prepared for in advance. So Mother Nature, again, is going to give us a hard time, which brings me right to the next one, pest control.
Yeah, and the weeds might be taking over and the pests might be coming in. I mean, we have occasionally problems with deer, and those crops that are already established that are out in our garden, like strawberries or parsley, that the deer like to come in and munch on. Well, if I start planting radishes in that same spot, or sunflowers, that yummy, crisp, fresh sprout, those deer love. So we have to be careful about knowing that those pests might come in, not only deer, but obviously bugs and other insects.
And then I think that possibly the greatest challenge is going to be the soil temperature. Understanding the role that soil temperature plays in seed germination and being able to work with that can be a challenge. If we're putting some seeds out when the soil is far too cool or moist for those seeds to go into, the seeds might rot. If it's too hot and too dry for some seeds. So being aware of the preferences of the plant that we're putting out into the garden, the seeds that we're about to direct sow, and making sure that the soil lines up with that.
I love that. And I think that's perfect. So let's start with our cool season lovers. These are seeds that can handle the cooler soil temperatures, can handle the cooler air temperatures, and will still germinate and successfully grow.
Sure. And these are ones that for us right now, this is early May when we're recording this, mid-May, whatever it might be. It's still cool. So these are the crops that we're dealing with direct sowing right now, or that we've recently direct sown. Two, of course, being spinach and lettuce. Now, these are two leafy greens that thrive in cool, moist environments, which is exactly what we have to provide them right now. So they're very happy. We've also got some root crops, radishes, carrots, beets. This is an important thing for us to think about. Not only, yes, these are cool weather crops, so they're going to be perfect for planting this early in the season, but they're also root crops. So root crops are a category of plants that, whether they're cool weather or warm weather, wherever they're falling into the spectrum here, they are plants that need to be direct sown, specifically because what we're trying to grow is a robust root system. That's the part that we want to eat. Imagine a carrot, that's just a big taproot, right? And if we start them in little containers and the root growth gets stunted, that's going to affect our final harvest, right? Because that's what we're harvesting. So these types of plants, they do not like to be transplanted at all. So we need to be starting them in the ground. Some other examples, of course, of crops that dislike being transplanted would be dill. That's a good one. Fennel would be another one that falls into that. Those are Apiaceae. They're in the same plant family as carrots. They make a big taproot, much like a carrot does. Parsnips, of course, very similar again. Cilantro would be another one. Poppies. If you're growing poppies in your garden, you're going to want to direct sow them as well. Again, just because of this very fast growing root system, easily can get root bound and stunted when we start them in containers. They don't transplant well.
And I think some other just kind of cool season crops that you could direct sow, you could start in advance, but like kale, cabbage, any of the brassicas.
Sure. Often on a seed packet for a broccoli or kale, any of those plants that you just mentioned, it will say direct sow right on it, and they can direct sow. But now if we go back to our list of challenges that we discussed here, weather unpredictability. And here in Michigan, one of the unpredictable weather scenarios that we'll encounter early in the spring is torrential downpour. And when we plant all these tiny little seeds in the garden, they are quickly devastated by torrential downpour, which will just wash them all away. So even though, yes, I can direct sow those seeds, I'm much more comfortable starting them indoors and then bringing little transplants out. They're cool weather crops, so I can transplant them out into the garden early, but they'll have a little root system and they can hold themselves in place and be more prepared to handle this unpredictable weather that we're very likely to experience. And another cool weather crop that I love to grow, of course, is peas. And this is a classic example of a direct sown cool weather crop. As soon as you can get the soil is workable, you can start planting peas, And this is a large seed. And what we'll find in some of these examples we've got coming up of other plants too, is that large seeded crops typically are almost always direct sown. So peas is going to be one of them. Peas and some of these other larger seeds, I like to soak them first before I plant them, sometimes even overnight, right? And the soaking process is going to soften the seed coat, so it's going to speed up the germination rates. It's going to get these plants going a little bit faster. Word of caution, of course, with doing that, especially in the early spring, if you're going to be having a lot of rain and the soil is already quite wet, you don't need to soak these seeds before you plant them out. Now they've already taken out a bunch of water. They're waterlogged. You put them out in this wet soil, they're probably going to rot and they're not going to make it.
And we've tried both methods before because we do have quite rainy seasons here, and we've soaked them before and they've done well. This year we didn't soak our pea seeds, and thank goodness we didn't, because we basically had 1.5 to 2 weeks of solid rain with a lot of flooding in our area. So we did experience great germination rates and the peas are thriving now. So that worked out. Now let's dive into these warm season crops, which means that these crops, to be direct sown, they prefer warm soil, warm air.
Yeah, and these are some of my favorites for sure here. We got things like beans and corn. These are crops that, again, these are large seeded examples, right? These are big seeds. So we're going to direct sow them, but they need that warm soil. It's so important that we allow that soil time to warm up before we get them planted. Beans have very sensitive root systems. They're not going to transplant very well. Direct sowing them is the way to go for sure. We've also got squash, cucumbers. Now, squash, cucumbers, I'm going to add to this list. Melons. These are all warm season plants, of course, and they're all the same plant family, Cucurbitaceae. And they don't transplant very well either. In some scenarios, you can get away with starting them and transplanting them out if you're going to maybe start them in a peat pot or something where you're not going to disrupt that root system at all. But I find it very rarely worth any of that effort. And it's much better to direct sow those crops, again, once the soil has warmed up. And then sunflowers is here on the list. And we mentioned sunflowers already once. It's one of the deer's favorite snacks, but it's another large seeded crop that we're going to direct sow once the weather warms up.
One of the things that we're going to want to consider when we're thinking about direct sowing is the timing of the plants.
Right. And so in some scenarios, people might use the frost date here, but I find that this is an unreliable benchmark for us to utilize, right? It really, I won't say it doesn't matter, but it almost doesn't matter, because all the frost date really serves here as this is the last day that the air is going to freeze. And it's really just an approximation. Nature's going to do whatever nature wants. So it's just kind of like around this time, this is what's going to be happening. So we can use it as a benchmark to say before that time is probably the good time to be planting our cold weather crops, before the frost date. But there's other factors at play here. So we're going to have like when the soil thaws out, how workable is the soil before we can start planting our peas? How wet is the soil? Is it muddy and clumpy from all the rain? Has the soil reached 40 degrees, the temperature of the soil? So there's a lot of far more specific factors that we want to consider before we plant any of these cool weather crops, but we can utilize the frost date sort of as a benchmark to say, okay, I know in the weeks leading up to this moment, this is what we should be planning for. And it's the same thing on the opposite side of this. After the frost date, then we want to start looking at the more specific benchmarks for planting our warm weather crops. Again, soil temperature being one of the most important ones. What's the weather like? How much rain are you getting? is your garden tilled and ready, right? I guess so. There's a lot of factors here. So it's really just like a very loose guideline to work with.
And each person's going to have their own little micro ecosystem within their property also. I mean, how shaded are you, or how is it a raised bed, which will warm faster than in the ground planting? So it'll just depend on your specific situation. And those frost dates are just there to help guide us, not an end all be all date that you need to live by.
Absolutely. So really paying attention to your soil, your garden specifically, not the date on the calendar. That's what we want to do. Let nature be our guide.
Yes, exactly.
But once we do have that all determined and we're ready to plant, we want to make sure we follow some of the basic techniques to ensure that we have direct sow gardening success, right? And I think the first one we need to talk about is the depth at which we plant the seed.
So there's a general rule of thumb here, and that is to plant at 1.5 times the size of the seed, which explain what that means to me, Bevan.
Imagine your seed. So let's think about a bean, because that's a big seed that we can all imagine. And you look at your bean and you look at the width of your bean. It's about 1.5 times the width of that seed is the depth that you plant it. So imagine a bean, 1.5 times that. We're looking at about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches. We're going to plant that thing. So just to make this more simple, larger seeds are typically planted a little bit deeper. Tiny seeds are closer to the surface, right? But we want to pay attention to the depth at which we plant these seeds, because they've got to be low enough in the soil that they're protected, but they can't be too deep, because those tiny little seedlings will never make it to the surface in time to survive, right? So ensuring that they're at a proper depth is very, very important. We also want to consider the spacing at which we plant these seeds. And it depends on our planting technique. And there's a lot of different ways that we can plant. We're going to be planting by rows. We might be broadcasting seeds. We're growing them on hills, whatever it might be. But we need to think about the spacing. Ultimately, we want these seedlings to be at the spacing that the adult plants need to be at to be happy. And that can be difficult when we're dealing with tiny seeds. Let's use lettuce for an example, or radishes for an example. When we plant these things, we're often going to plant them a little bit thicker than they need to be. And this could be because we're not sure of the germination rates of these seeds. Are they even all going to come up? I don't know. We might be thinking about, I've got a lot of things on my to-do list here, and I don't have time to hold all these little individual seeds and cut them out, whatever it might be. We're going to plant them a little bit thicker, which then we have to go back and thin them out. And when we thin out the little seedlings, we have to thin them out so they're at the spacing that they need when they're full grown plants, which is hard to do sometimes because these tiny plants are very tiny and there's a lot of space in between them. And, you got to do it because these full grown plants require that space in order to properly produce the food that we need.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And so you can either do the work up front and plant less, or you can do the work in the back after they're started to sprout. You can go through and thin them out. And that's actually a little bonus, because then you can eat those little radish sprouts or broccoli sprouts or whatever you might be thinning. And they are great in salads. They're great just on a sandwich. They're little sprouts.
Yeah. Or eat them right in the garden. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the biggest mistakes that people make, though, when they're direct sowing is letting their seeds dry out. These seeds are really sensitive and the weather is unpredictable, like we've discussed. So we need to be aware of keeping the seeds moist, especially until they've germinated.
This is particularly difficult with small seeds. Larger seeds that we planted a little bit deeper into the soil, they got a little bit more of a wiggle room here before that soil dries out, right? But these little tiny seeds that are right near the surface, they're going to dry out faster, whether it's because it's a sunny day, it's a very windy day. Wind is going to quickly dry out the top of the soil. And the top of the soil dries out. That means all these tiny seeds have dried out, which is going to definitely affect your germination rates. So we've got to stay on top of keeping this soil moist. Keep your seed beds moist always. Consistently moist. Sometimes that means watering more than once a day. So we got to get out there. I'll often recommend mulch. Mulch is great for everything, right? As we probably talk about mulch on every episode of the podcast because of how many things it's going to do for us. In this scenario, it's going to help keep that soil, the surface soil, a little bit more moist, or it's going to help conserve that water. I use straw in this type of a scenario, something that's easy for these little plants to push their way through as they grow. So it's not going to impact their ability to germinate necessarily, but it's going to help try to keep that soil moist. Of course, mulch is a great option for larger seeds that are going to have no problem pushing through. For smaller seeds, maybe a little bit thinner layer of that mulch just to make sure they can get through it. But it's really going to save us a lot of time out there watering.
So I think the easiest crops to start your direct seeding journey is going to be my favorite, beans. Actually, it's a small house favorite around here. It's really what got us started in the seed world was just a good old fashioned Green bean.
Beans are magical.
They are.
I love them so much. Yeah, so beans are a really nice one to start with. They're easy to grow. Basically, anybody can grow a bean anywhere, and it is a quick and easy one to direct sow. It's good to understand. You can easy to identify the depth at which you plant them. I used it in the example when I was talking about that. Yeah, beans are a good one. Another one in that same vein would be sunflowers. That's another large seeded crop that's very easy to grow. It's so easy to grow. And it's so forgiving. It's sunflower. Give me a break. Look at how many sunflowers we've got growing out here that were planted by like birds and squirrels.
Exactly.
They were not thinking about the depth of planting or keeping it moist or anything like that. I don't know what they were thinking. Lettuce is another good example of a easy to grow direct sow crop that everybody should give it a try.
And radish. Radish is a go-to for between rows of things that you already have planted out there, or just as a practice to growing any root crops. If you've never dove into that kind of gardening yet, this is an easy, fast crop that you'll see, success from right away.
Yeah, for sure. Radish is a good one. Like you mentioned, you can plant radishes. We'll tuck them into corners and places. We'll grow them around tomato plants. And by the time the plants themselves, the tomato plants get so big that they need that space, the radishes have already been harvested and they're gone. So they are a great crop to make use of space that's only going to be available for limited times. For something like carrots that takes a long time to germinate, we'll plant radishes also along with the carrots. So the radishes come up right away and they help mark that row so you know where those carrots are going to be later. So radishes are actually doing us some favors. They're doing some of the work out there for us.
So just start small and try a couple seeds this spring. Put them in the ground, see how they grow. I mean, seeds want to grow. They have the desire to do that. So don't overthink it. Just get them in the ground, see what happens.
Well, there you go. And here we are at the end of yet another show together. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Remember, if you enjoyed the podcast, you can always show your support by joining our community on Patreon. You can find a link to that and so much more at seedsandweedspodcast.com. This episode was edited and produced by all of us here at Small House Farm, and we're enjoying a little bit of jazz from Star Osin. Thanks again for tuning in, my friends. My name is Bevan.
I'm Heather.
And we'll see you next time.